So welcome everybody. This is Always On VPN AMA Ask Me Anything May 2025 edition. And my name is Richard Hicks, the founder and principal consultant at Richard M. Hicks Consulting. And you can find me on Twitter, well, X, I guess now, at Richard Hicks. Most social media platforms, I am at Richard Hicks. Website is richardhicks.com as well. You guys should all be familiar with that. So this is an Ask Me Anything. I do have a bit of an agenda, though. I have a couple of task items that I want to cover off on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about an upcoming training class and some other training classes that I have coming up this year that might be of interest to you. I do want to share with you that we have a new community as well, a great place to exchange information, ask questions, get comments and feedback, and share your knowledge and expertise. So we want to talk about a little bit about that. I do want to talk also a little bit about strong certificate mapping. We talked about that in January. I think we last met in January, and that was a kind of a point of contention with a lot of folks. And I just want to talk a little bit about that. Some changes recently as well. There have been some change to DPC recently. So if you recall the last session that we had in January, we talked about DPC, Dynamic Profile Configurator, going open source. So DPC, if you're not familiar with it, is a software platform used to create and manage always on VPN client configuration settings. It's a software agent. It's managed via group policy. You can use Intune for that as well. So it's a pretty cool solution. But there's been a couple of updates. We'll talk a little bit about that. I also want to have a quick conversation about public TLS certificates. Many of you, if you're following the news, saw that there was some changes. Basically, the CA Browser Forum, the forum that kind of manages standards, implementation standards and security best practices for the web PKI, meaning public certificates, has announced that they are shortening the life cycle or the lifetime of public TLS certificates to 47 days. So there's sure to be a lot of weeping and gnashing of teeth over that one, but I want to talk a little bit about that. It shouldn't be a big deal for us as always on VPN administrators. I want to talk about that, and then finally we will wrap up with Q&A as we always do. Hit me up. You can just raise your hand. You can hit me up in the Q&A section or just hit the chat. Let me bring up my chat window here. Very good, cool, and yeah, so any questions pop up in there, let me know. Again, apologies for the late start there, technical difficulties being what they are. Before we get on to some of the other things, just a quick few bit of housekeeping items. As always, encourage you to sign up for the newsletter, richardhicks.com/newsletter. I don't spam you too much. I have probably 8 or 10 messages a year, probably, I think is what I looked at last time. I usually send out article updates, critical information, pertinent information. If there's security vulnerabilities that get announced or something like that, I'll put out a blast to the mailing list. Of course, announcements about training events, other opportunities, all sorts of things like that. I encourage you to join. Always on VPN. Implementing Always on VPN is still available from A-Press Media. You can buy that on Amazon. And then, of course, we still have a fantastic course on Pluralsight. The Pluralsight course, by the way, is probably the most comprehensive training course I've ever done. The typical Pluralsight training course for most of the technologies comes in about 2.5 to 3 hours. That's the target. The Pluralsight Always on VPN course that I did is a magnum opus, coming in at just under 7 hours. So it is one course. There is a crap ton of information in there. I would encourage you to check that out. You can find information on both of those, aovpnbook.com for the book and richardhicks.com/pluralsight for the Pluralsight training course. Next, I want to talk about another training opportunity. This is basically I run this course twice a year, and this is an online training course through the Via Monstra Online Training Academy, and this session is covering mastering certificates with Intune. So this is a 3-day live training course. So it's online virtual, but it is live and interactive. It's not just a recorded session like the Pluralsight. So you have the ability to interact with me. We can look at things together. It's a fantastic way to do this, and then also be able to do it from the comfort of your own home or office. We cover in this class, it's a comprehensive training course covering all aspects of Intune and certificates. Anything to do with delivering certificates with Intune. That includes using PKCS and SCEP, and we cover both of those in detail. We spend probably an entire day on SCEP because SCEP relies on NDES, and NDES is pretty complex, and there's like no real good documentation on the internet for that. So this is a great course to learn that. We cover cloud PKI too, not only standalone cloud PKI, but integration with on-premises ADCS. We cover lots of security best practices. I demonstrate absolutely everything. And then, of course, I do have some tools and sample files and things that I share with you that make your life a lot easier when you're working with certificates in Intune. And you can learn more and register for that class by going to richardhicks.com/masterclass. And that brings me to another point, is that in addition to the online training event, I do still deliver in-person training classes, believe it or not. Those kind of diminished post-COVID. I did a ton of it pre-COVID. Post-COVID, it's not been as popular, but I still do a handful of events this year or during the year. I'll be in Washington State doing an Always On VPN training class. It's a private event for a specific customer, but I still offer those at various times around the U.S. If you go to richardhicks.com/training, you can find details about those, where we have I have links to the online training classes, but I also have the current schedule of currently scheduled in-person training classes. So if you're interested in any of that, I would encourage you to do that. I love in-person training classes. I like having a whiteboard. I like being able to sit in the room, talk to people face to face, hash through challenges and issues, and answer questions, and kind of ponder deep, complex issues that might come up in your environment. So if you want to take advantage of those, please let me know. And if there's something, if you're in a particular region and you think that you'd like me to come and visit you and do a training class there, let me know, because a lot of times I'll get onesies and twosies that people hit me up. Hey, you're doing anything in New York? And if 2 or 3 people do that, then I can say, hey, maybe there's enough draw to do that. So let me know if you want me to come to your area, if you don't see anything on the training site that is helpful for you. That being said, I want to share with you some information about this new community that we talked about. So there's a new Discord channel. This was actually created by my good friend Leo Darcy, the proprietor of Darcy Services Limited and the author of DPC. And he should be on this call somewhere. I see you there, Leo.
Hey.
Anyway, how's it going, Leo? The Discord channel was created, I think the impetus was really just to provide support for DPC, but Leo was gracious enough to create a few communication channels so we can, on the channel, which is broadly called Microsoft Remote Access User Group, we have channels for Always On VPN, a couple for DPC, general questions as well as development questions. We have a global secure access channel. We're going to focus mostly on private access because that's the remote access part of GSA. And we even have a direct access channel. So if you're still working with direct access and have questions, feel free to join us. You can go to discord.aovpndpc.com and join the conversation. Thank you, Leo, for putting that link in the chat. I appreciate it. So anyway, that being said, Leo, anything to add to the Discord channel?
Yeah, I mean, it was very much started as a place to kind of chat with people around DPC, but it's nice to see that it has evolved
Absolutely.
quite rapidly, actually, into a place with lots of people chipping in, and I'm always grateful for the people who do contribute to it.
Absolutely.
We've hit over 100 people now. We're coming up on 140 people, actually.
Nice.
So
Nice.
yeah, it's great to see everyone.
Fantastic. It's way better than Reddit. By the way,
no comment.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, for everybody on the call, the reason, so we were on Discord, and by the way, we should have done this eons ago. This is just stupid, but I'll share with you. A couple of years ago, I started a Reddit channel called r/Always On VPN. It lasted a day until they closed it. No reason, no explanation, just closed. And so I tried to write them on Twitter, tried to write them on the site. I complained, nothing, never got anything from them. They just shut it down. No idea why. There's other channels that are similar for specific products. It was really weird. They just didn't want it for some reason. So anyway, just shut it down, and then I just never proceeded after that. So Discord's a great place. We're starting to ramp up. Lots of great interactive conversation on lots of topics there. Again, DPC related, but also if you're not using DPC, we still have an AOVPN chat channel where we can just talk about all things always on VPN. So if you have any questions, pop in there and join us. It'd be great to have you. I want to talk briefly about strong certificate mapping. We talked about this last January when we met. And it was crucial. It was crucial because in February of 2025, the Microsoft security updates that went out changed some things that could have impacted you. So I'm going to talk about that in a second, but I just want to recap. So we talked about in January this change that was coming in February. That change was basically a result of a security update that went out in May of 2022. So in May of 2022, Microsoft introduced KB 501.4754, and it made changes to KDCs and issuing CAs to enforce something called strong certificate mapping. And essentially, it was first, when you applied the May 2022 update, domain controllers were placed in what's known as compatibility mode. So if the certificate used for authentication against Active Directory was not strongly mapped, it would just complain about it, log it in the event log, and then that information was yours to use. The idea was that Microsoft was going to flip this over to force that strong certificate mapping at some point in the future. That point was February of 2025, so just a few months ago. Now, show of hands, folks, on just raise your hand on this real quick. How many of you had problems after you installed the February 2025 update? Did anybody have any problems with that? It was probably a couple. So here's the deal. I was kind of ringing this bell prior to February 2025, telling people, hey, you've got to get your certificates in order or you're going to have this problem. The good news is that, of course, they allowed you to have an out. So we'll talk about that in a second. But anyway, I digress just a second. The idea behind strong certificate mapping was to mitigate some attacks that Microsoft was seeing in the wild. And of course, the principle here, or the idea behind this was to bind the service principal, or the user or computer account's SID to the specific certificate. And there's other ways to map, but this is kind of the default way. And the idea was that Microsoft was going to move to full enforcement in the future. Again, that future date was February of 2025. So again, you probably had some problems with that. Now, in the February 2025 update, they switched to full enforcement, but they still allow you to switch back to compatibility mode by using a registry key. Okay, so I'm assuming those of you who raised your hand there had indicated that, that's that's exactly what had happened to you. You hadn't had all your certificates sorted out. You applied the February 2025 update to your domain controllers, and then all of a sudden, Always On VPN with client certificates breaks. Wi-Fi, after you're using user or device certificates, breaks. A handful of things broke, so you probably ran into that. That being said, with the February 2025 update, Since it is now being enabled by default, you still have the option, as I'd mentioned, to switch to compatibility mode with a registry key. If you need to know that registry key, I'm assuming if you've run into this problem, you've long since fixed this, right? Maybe we should have had this meeting like end of February. I don't know. But bottom line is that the critical aspect here is that any pain that you had, you could alleviate by just switching back to compatibility mode. The real challenge here is that, of course, in in September of 2025, whoop, my pen's not working. I'm trying to underline that. In September of 2025, then there is no option to opt out of this. So Microsoft has indicated September 2025, full enforcement, no opt out. So let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we face here. So when you have a certificate that's not strongly mapped and you present it against Active Directory, in compatibility mode, you just get a warning. In full enforcement mode, the authentication request is rejected. So obviously, we need to update all of our user and device authentication certificates to make sure that they include strong certificate mapping, and that's typically by doing the embedded SID. So there's a new extension that's added to the certificate, and the SID is actually populated into that field, and that way ADCS, or excuse me, the domain controllers understand that this is strongly mapped, and so they'll accept that for authentication. Now, this mostly affects certificates issued with Intune. If you're issuing certificates from on-premises, the May 2022 update fixed everything, and that's not a problem. If you're using online templates, it's not an issue. It is only with offline templates, which are used by Intune with PKCS or SCEP. Last October, Intune fixed that, and so PKCS and SCEP both supported it. The problem is that people, if you're issuing certificates for, like most organizations issue certificates for 1 year, well, they won't renew for a period of time, and of course, we're going to run into this September 2025 date, and you may still have certificates out there that are not strongly mapped. So here's what I'm encouraging customers to do. If you make changes to your certificate template, for example, if you're using SCEP, you just have to populate a new field in the subject alternative name fields, and essentially that basically maps the SID to that certificate. And of course, then Intune knows how to handle that when you put that directive there. The problem is that doesn't go back and update any existing certificates. So what I'm recommending is that to ensure that all of our certificates are updated in a timely manner and fully rotated before the September 25 date comes, my suggestion to you is to create a new certificate profile using PKCS or SCEP, and then delete the old one or unassign the old one. It's up to you. That will force Intune to issue a net new certificate to every endpoint because it's basically a brand new policy. It will also force Intune to go back and remove the old certificates that are not strongly mapped and revoke them from your CA if you've enabled that option in Intune, which I hope you have. That being said, if you do all of that before September 2025, you should be in good shape. And this brings up a question, or brings up a point that I want to drive home. And I actually wrote an article about this recently on my website. If you go to directaccess.richardhicks.com, I wrote a certificate. I wrote a blog post about short-lived certificates in the enterprise. And I was kind of making the point that, by default, we typically create certificates that are valid for a year. And my question was, should we be doing that? Right? I'm encouraging customers to consider that. Consider shorter lived certificates, 60-day, 90-day, 6-month, whatever works for you, even 30 days. I think there are scenarios in which it might be beneficial to have certificates much shorter lived than that. If you are automating the process of enrollment and renewal, you shouldn't care how long the certificates live because they'll just recycle. And so there are some benefits to that. So if you want to check that article out, you can go visit the website, directaccess.richardhicks.com. And if you have any questions or want to talk about that in a bit more, hop in the Discord channel and we'll have a chat. So That being said, let's see here. I want to talk a bit about some of the changes to Always On VPN DPC at a high level, at least. So, when DPC went open source earlier this year, at the beginning of this year, it was version 5.0. We are now on version 5.03, and as the number indicates, there's been a few minor revisions to this. To this software. The most recent ones being some improved error logging, some enhancements to, excuse me, to trusted network detection, mostly around some of our foreign friends who use crazy characters in their network names or in their DNS suffixes. So basically, Leo had to add support for Unicode characters there. So I think that was a welcome change. And then we removed IPv6 support when including Microsoft 365 traffic, excluding it, mostly because when Leo added it, it broke things, and we discovered a bug. That bug is with Always On VPN, and if you basically the bug is if I don't know if Philip is on. Yeah, Philip's on. Maybe you can speak to this, Philip. There was a bug where if you include an exclusion route that was an IPv6 route and you didn't have an IPv6 gateway, things went sideways. Philip, maybe you know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's right. And it's not only v6, it's the other way around. So it will be
Meaning,
v4 also.
Okay.
So if you have an IP4 exclusion route but no IP4 gateway, you would hit the same unintended feature.
Unintended, yes. Thank you for correcting me. Okay. Leo, what are your thoughts? Anything else more to add to that?
Yeah, that's a pretty good summary, really. I do hope to bring that capability back for the people who are running IPv6 networks. There is discussions going on around whether we can inject those IPv6 addresses into the tunnel kind of live when we detect an IPv6 connection is up. The kind of problem with that is that the way that DPC was architected was it was all kind of done on the pre-connection stuff. So bringing capabilities in on a post-connection needs some quite intricate routing of data through the application to support that. And obviously there's a lot of people using DPC now with a lot of clients, and the last thing we want to do is break anyone.
Yes.
And we've been running the Office 365 exclusions without IPv6 for many years now. I know it's only recently someone noticed that we weren't doing the IPv6. So there's, shall we say, limited demand for that feature. But again, if it is a key to your workflows, please do add your add your support either in Discord or on GitHub, where we're tracking these issues kind of in a more formal way, so that features can be prioritized accordingly.
Outstanding. Good to know. Yep. Very good.
Oh, and of course, DPC is now fully open source. So if anyone wants to have a crack at it, they are more than welcome to help out.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you have development skills, let's, please share. Yeah. That no question. That's, you're rather single threaded there. So if we can get the community support and start submitting code contributions, that would be fantastic. If I knew how to code, I would help you, but unfortunately I don't. So I can help with documentation, I guess. Outstanding. And by the way, that does bring me to my last point about DPC, is that just to remind everybody, DPC does have a commercial support option. So there are a number of customers in the world that are that can support open source software in their environments, but they must be supported. So Leo was smart enough to basically create a public support option and a commercial support option. And so I'm actually helping him with that as well. So if you sign up for DPC commercial support, you have a bunch of capabilities. Maybe Leo, you could talk to those as what the advantages of commercial support are.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously for the kind of open source platform, we've got Discord, which we can more than happy, and GitHub, where we can help support people on kind of an ad hoc, no obligations basis, and we're very willing to do that, and we want to help people out. But we're also conscious that for a lot of organizations, AOVPN, VPNs in general, are an absolutely business critical technology. And when you're putting a piece of middleware in that chain with DPC, having we might get back to you eventually, or can you share your support files in a public forum, doesn't necessarily cut it for a lot of customers. So we've got the DPC support, commercial support capability, where we will do private messaging, private calls with you as required. It's covering both myself as the kind of core creator and maintainer of the software, and also I've brought Richard on board for, both for kind of time zone usage or capabilities, as he is obviously US based and I'm UK based, but also that kind of downplays his extensive and almost universal knowledge of the AOVPN platform, which a lot of cases with DPC issues, there is a lot of unpicking as to, is this a DPC thing or is this just a unintended feature, as Philippe put it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I hear you there. Yeah, no question. And by the way, that's one of the nice things about DPC, is it does include a lot of capabilities that's been built into the platform to address a lot of those known issues and limitations, and implements a lot of workarounds and so forth. So it does save a lot of pain in that regard. But yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Leo. Appreciate it. Moving on, I wanted to talk about public certificates, TLS certificates. So I don't know how many of you have heard this, but the WebPKI, basically the consortium that manages the public internet in terms of TLS, has decided that they are moving to a 47-day certificate life cycle. Now, what does that entail, or ultimately, why is that? Let's talk about that a little bit. So the why, of course, is mostly around agility. You'll hear the term crypto agility, and functionally what that means is that we need to be able to more rapidly and responsively update certificates in the ecosystem to respond to challenges, issues, limitations, bugs, security vulnerabilities and things like that. This was largely driven out of, but there was a whole ton of vulnerabilities announced in like the 2010s. So, for example, things like folks may be remembering things like Lucky 13, Breach, Heartbleed, Poodle, Freak, Logjam, Drown. There's a bunch of vulnerabilities. Sweet 32, Robot. There was a whole bunch of them that came out in the 2010s. Seems like that whole decade was pretty bad for TLS. And what we realized is that we back in the day, we used to have 5-year certificates and things like that. And so those certificates would just live almost into perpetuity, and it was a real problem. And so the industry as a whole started to shorten that life cycle. So we got down to, a number of years ago, we got down to 1 year. It's 397 or 98 days is what we are today. Now, of course, Let's Encrypt is a public CA that issues free public TLS certificates, and they are only valid for 90 days. And so now the industry has decided, and there was a lot of talk about, well, the industry as a whole is probably going to go to 90 days. Apple jumps in there and says, hold my beer, let's do 47 days. And lo and behold, it passed. So this was a CA browser forum ballot where all of the entities involved in this and under that directive basically agreed to it. I don't think anybody disagreed to it. And so the idea behind a 47-day certificate, by the way, the number 47 sounding a little strange, is that it basically gives you a calendar month, so 30, 31 days typically, plus a few days additional for buffer, right? So if you have problems or issues. So what it does is allows you to, on a calendar basis, be able to rotate these certificates. That's the idea behind 47-day certificates. And of course, the advantage to having your certificates rotated more frequently is that it diminishes the effects of key compromise. So if a key compromise, and this is the thing, private key compromise is prohibitively difficult to detect. And so in that regard, having a certificate that's, a year, and back in the day when they were, 5 years, God, whatever, when a key was compromised, that gave the attacker a very broad window of opportunity. They could do a lot of stuff over long periods of time because it was very difficult to detect key compromise sometimes. It may be impossible. By rotating them every month, it means we've shortened that window of opportunity. So the longest attacker might have access to this key is going to be 47 days, right? So there's some advantages there. But I think the biggest thing is we need to be able to update protocols and algorithms and security parameters. RSA has been with us for 30 something, almost 40 years. It's not going to last forever. Right, and with the coming, quantum computing conundrum that we're facing here, and those being able to break modern or legacy encryption, we're moving to post-quantum cryptography standards, and what the organization is doing is preparing for that. That's probably in the next 5 to 10 years, and I think they're just getting ahead of this, saying, hey, when this happens, and if RSA falls, or if there's a problem or whatever, and we need to update, it's not going to take us years to solve this problem. It's going to take us maybe months. And so that will be very helpful. And of course, if you're talking about doing certificates every month, no administrator in their right mind wants to do this manually every month. And so one of the other advantages to doing this is that it encourages automation. And it encourages automation on both sides. Not only do we as the administrator have to automate our processes, but it also forces a lot of these public CAs, and most of them don't support it today, but it's going to force them to support automation. So a lot of them don't support, Acme is kind of the standard for automated certificate enrollment and renewal on WebPKI, and a lot of CAs don't support it today. So Let's Encrypt does, and there's probably a few others that are out there that support that. So we're going to need to get to a point where we can automate that. Now, a couple of things about this 47-day lifetime edict is that it does not happen immediately. So don't worry, you don't have to panic yet. The first timeline, or the first, hurdle here is the March 15, 2026 date, and that is when the certificates are going to be reduced to 200 days. So up until March 14th of 2026, you will be able to purchase a 398-day or 1-year certificate, public TLS certificate. So in that case, but on March 15th, then that time gets reduced to 200 days. So that's roughly 6 months. So that's going to last for 1 year. And at the 1 year mark, we are going to, on March 15, 2027, we are now moving to 100 days. So that's where it gets pretty interesting. So at 100 days, that's roughly 3 months plus, right? So in March 15, 2027, certificates that you purchase after that date will be valid for 100 days. So the last timeline, or the last hurdle now, is March 15 of 2029. They've given us a 2-year window to get to 47-day certificates. So ultimately, this is going to be phased in over time. It's not going to happen immediately, but it will happen. And the implications here are that if you are running Always On VPN specifically and using SSTP, best practices dictate using a public TLS certificate for this service. And so we need to be mindful of this. Now, the good news is that I have actually been using 90-day certificates from Let's Encrypt for a variety of customers. So I've actually implemented solutions to allow the fully automated enrollment of TLS certificates and assignment of TLS certificates to the SSTP listener for Windows Server RAS servers. And so I have basically published a sample script for you. So basically what I've done is for a handful of customers that I've done this for over the years, and I actually run this in my lab as well, just for dog fooding, I guess, is that using my sample script, I've created a custom script for each of these customers because they're unique to their environments. And typically we hard code a lot of things in there. My sample script, I've kind of parameterized them and turned them into variables, but a lot of my customers, we just hard code things in there. But at the end of the day, I do have a sample script that I've published that that will demonstrate how you can enable the automatic enrollment of a Let's Encrypt service, an SSL certificate or TLS certificate from Let's Encrypt. So my PowerShell script leverages the Posh Acme module. If you're not familiar with that, I would encourage you to start investigating that. The Posh Acme module, you could install that, just install-module, Posh-Acme. Fantastic module for working with Let's Encrypt. And it may work for other Acme platforms. I don't know. I've only ever used it for Let's Encrypt, but it may work with others. And of course, the script just automates the enrollment of a Let's Encrypt certificate for RAS for SSTP. Automatically enrolls the certificates, assigns it to the listener, reboots or restarts the remote access service, and so forth. With Let's Encrypt specifically, and I'm sure it's going to be this way for other Acme providers, is there's a DNS challenge. So when I request a certificate, it's going to give me basically a key that I have to publish in DNS. And if you're doing this manually, you would just go into DNS and create the text record and stuff, and then populate that. And then once it's populated and propagated, then you can download the certificate, right? They'll issue the certificate. In this case, once we're trying to automate this, the Posh Acme PowerShell module does have a plugins for different DNS providers. So I'm using Cloudflare DNS and have used that for several customers. So my sample script uses the Cloudflare DNS API. There are other APIs or other plugin providers available. So I would encourage you to look at the Posh Acme documentation, because there's tons of DNS providers out there. So if you're not using Cloudflare for DNS, chances are real good that somebody's already created a plugin provider for your DNS hoster of choice, and basically it automates that publishing of the challenge record, and so that you can fully automate the enrollment of Let's Encrypt certificates. And again, I typically create this PowerShell script, and then we just run a scheduled task on the RAS server to run it every 75 days. Again, Let's Encrypt is good for 90 days. So at the 75-day mark, it just goes out and enrolls for a new certificate, assigns it to the listener, and then restarts the remote access service, and it's good to go. We run it in the middle of the night, 2 or 3 in the morning or whatever, and you're good to go. If you have multiple servers, you might want to stagger that among servers. Always a good idea to do that, right? And so it's going to be a good solution. If you're interested in looking at that, you can go to richardhicks.com/SSTPLE-cert, and that's just a redirect that takes you into the GitHub. So you can find it on GitHub as well. So if you're interested in that, have a look at that. The script as published wouldn't work, I think, for a fully automated solution. You'd probably have to do a little bit more work to fully automate it in your environment. That said, I've done this for several customers. I'm using this in my lab. It's a fantastic solution. So the good news here is that if you're using 47-day certificates, you should be okay, right? As long as your as long as your TLS provider, your TLS certificate provider supports Acme. If they don't now, they probably will. My solution of choice is DigiCert. I love DigiCert. I worked with them for many, many years. And if they don't support it today, they most certainly will by in the next year plus or so. So anyway, just look out for that. Now, here's the other question. I want to raise this. So because I've gotten a few people say, well, I'm just going to switch to using private certificates. I'm going to use certificates issued by ADCS, and I'll just use those. I would discourage you from doing that, and the reason for that is there's two. There's a technical and an ideological one. I'll start with the ideological one first. The philosophical reason for not using private certificates is that they are really designed for private use. My mantra is use public certificates for public things, use private certificates for private things. And if you stick to that model, your life will be infinitely easier because you have lots of problems when you try to switch. Both ways, by the way. So if you're trying to use a certificate issued by ADCS for SSTP, you can make it function. It will work, and there are things you can do to resolve that. So for example, the biggest problem is that most private CAs, ADCS implemented for a private network, are not publicly accessible, meaning the CRL, the certificate revocation list, is not made available publicly. That's pretty common because it doesn't need to be. We're doing private things with our private CA, right? We have public, if it's a public-facing service, then we use a public CA, and they have the CRL infrastructure to support that. We don't have to worry about that. By the way, their CRL infrastructure is highly available, very robust, often using content delivery networks or CDNs to ensure robust performance and high availability. So lots of good reasons to use a public TLS certificate for that. So I would encourage you to do that. There are things you can do to make a private certificate work. None of them I would recommend. I've had customers say, yeah, we have our CRL published publicly. Great, that's fantastic. But if that CRL ever goes down, then none of your VPN clients are going to be able to connect. So you want to make sure that is very, very highly available and robust. And a lot of customers I see that don't have that. They have it published on a single public-facing web server. It's a single point of failure, and it can be really problematic. The other thing is that there's, people say, well, I'll just disable revocation checking on the client. Yes, you can technically do that. That is a really bad idea. I would strongly discourage you from doing that. That is a horrible security practice. We never want to do that. But it is technically possible. That being said, don't worry about 47-day certificates. I have this script. I've been doing it for customers and myself for many years. It's not a bad solution. It's set it and forget it. I think you as administrators, your biggest problem is going to be dealing with the other things in your environment that need public certificates, like load balancers, firewalls, those types of things. That may not support automation. Obviously, probably don't have PowerShell on your Fortinet firewall or something, or your F5 load balancer. So you have to wait for those vendor platforms to update their code and support automation and so forth. So should be interesting, should be fun. But at least for Always On VPN with SSTP, shouldn't be a big deal. Before I move on, I just want to open it up. Any questions at all? Before we get to some more questions here. So I actually want to go over some known issues, and really it's just more of a rehashing of existing known issues. But any questions at all about anything we've spoken about to this point? I'll take that as a no. Very good, cool. As far as known issues, in terms of known issues, I think Always On VPNs, in Windows 11 has been pretty stable for the most part. We still have this issue with Windows 11 and Intune with connection drops. This is related to the VPN profiles being removed and replaced on each device sync, even if you've not made any changes. This only happens with custom XML. It happened with the VPN template, the VPN policy template in Intune when Windows 11 first came out. They fixed that, but again, today it is still broken for XML. So the reason I talk about this, and I'm talking about this now, is that I get questions on forums, on Discord, email, on Twitter and X and things like that, LinkedIn as well. Where people come to me and say, yeah, I have this weird problem with Windows 11. It keeps dropping out. And it's like, oh gosh, this is a known issue. It's been a known issue for a long time. And so fundamentally what I do is I ask them, hey, look at the GUID of the VPN profile. So get -VPN connection, -name and the name of the connection, and then select object GUID. And that will return the GUID of the VPN profile. Then issue a sync, and then just run that command again. If the GUID changes, you got a new VPN profile. And again, that is a known issue when you're using custom XML to deploy Always On VPN profiles on Windows 11. Not a problem on Windows 10, not a problem on Windows 11 if you're using Intune native VPN template. But the workaround is essentially The XML file needs to be ordered precisely as Intune expects to see it. And that is sometimes tedious and time consuming to get done. So I've posted a link here that has a kind of some discussion about that. But bottom line is I've actually developed a couple of tools to essentially when you push a VPN profile down, we have the ability to basically extract it from the client and compare. And so that's what we're doing is we're saying, hey, what is the XML that is actually gets implemented on the endpoint, and what does that look like and compared to the one that I uploaded to Intune? And sometimes it's very obvious where things are out of order. So the order of elements is now critical in Windows 11, but sometimes it's stupid stuff. Like for the other day, I fixed one for a customer where there was a carriage return at the end of the file on the one that I had that is on the endpoint, but not on the one I uploaded. So it can be really maddening. Notepad++ and the compare module are your friend here. That is a valuable tool. I'm sure most of us use that. It's a pretty common tool, but Notepad++, you can open, basically what you do is you open both files, then you choose plugins compare, and then do a compare, and they should be perfectly matched. And if anything is different, fix it. Just address it. So in some cases, you can literally take the XML that you get off of the endpoint and just publish that to Intune. I've actually done that before. Not every case, though. I would caution you. There are some times where things don't come through all the way in the XML. So there are some scenarios where it doesn't work, but most of the time it does. And you can find those in my PowerShell module. So if you install -module AOVPN tools, there's a command called get-VPN client profile XML, and that allows you to basically extract the XML from the endpoint and look at that. If you have any questions at all, or if you want me to look at your XML, drop it. Just drop me an email and let me know, and I'd be happy to review it for you. So I've had good luck. I call myself the XML whisperer. I can now seem to get them to work on a fairly reliable basis. So, and I have sample files that I've published some of them, but I have some of them that are just local, where I know it works. I've validated this, that it absolutely works, and then I can use those to compare, or I can share those with you as well. Very good. So that brings us to the Q&A portion. So at this point, I'm just going to open the floor and bring it to all of you folks. Carlton had a tornado warning. That's crazy. So Carlton is in Texas. It's a little tornado-ish down there. Carlton, if you dropped, I don't know if you're on. Hopefully you're okay. But anyway, any questions at all today?
Apologies for joining late. I have to go back and watch the first half of this presentation, but kind of knowing that we're currently using direct access, looking at Always On VPN, but also got a brief intro from a Microsoft MSC about their SME, about their SSE solution. That seems to be a successor, assumed successor to Always On VPN. So kind of looking at the lay of the land, is Always On VPN, so one of the legs up it has is it's part of our E5, whereas the SSE is not.
Yes.
So like, is it in your opinion still worth implementing Always On VPN, or is it going to be, like I haven't kept up to date on the features, updates, functionality with Always On VPN, but is it still being maintained, or is it pretty much the same status as direct access, where it's kind of on ice?
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. So Always On VPN is an excellent solution today. No question that the future is going to be inter-private access, which is part of the global secure access suite, right? So inter-private access is a zero trust network access solution, completely cloud service. So there's no infrastructure to deploy. Today you have to deploy an agent there's a software agent that gets pushed out to your endpoints, and you have to deploy a connector on premises. Ideally, you would put multiple connectors for redundancy, but principally speaking, you deploy some software on premises. There's a software agent gets pushed out to your endpoint, and then the rest of it is just policy. So you actually don't have to stand up any infrastructure whatsoever. In some point in the future, Microsoft has indicated that they will actually bake the GSA client into the operating system at some point in the future. So in the future, it gets even easier. You will deploy a software connector on premises and then just enable policy to get and to take advantage of this zero trust solution. And it is really, really slick. It's a fantastic solution. Integrates tightly with interconditional access. It is a fantastic solution. It is the way of the future, no question. That being said, Always On VPN is still a very good solution, and also may be a better fit depending on where you're at. The intra-private access is great if you have intra-join devices, but if you're still using classic domain join or hybrid join, then perhaps Always On VPN would be a better fit. Today, intra-private access does not have any support for machine layer or machine level connectivity. It may in the future, but it doesn't support anything like pre-logon, which is really critical for things like hybrid joined devices. So in that scenario, Always On VPN might still be a better fit. I expect Always On VPN to probably be deployed, net new for at least another year or two plus, maybe, depends. And you bring up an excellent point, is that as an alternative, it is cost effective, right? So intra-private access is a more feature-rich solution, but it does have a premium price tag associated with it, right? It's like $10 per user per month or something. So it's not included in anything like E5, whereas Always On VPN is, well, I mean, you don't even really need any special licensing at all. If you're doing hybrid join and you want the device tunnel, then you have to have Enterprise Edition, but that's included in E3 and E5. And so it's really easy to adopt Always On VPN. Now, from a technology perspective, Always On VPN should be considered kind of a legacy solution, right? It is a traditional VPN, kind of broad access. The advantages are that we can integrate conditional access with Always On VPN, but we don't get things like continuous access evaluation, which I don't think that's part of. I don't think that's a part of global secure access today, but I think it's coming in the future. Again, and I don't know, maybe Philip, you could speak to maybe the supportability of that. I don't believe that there's. I mean, I think Always On VPN is fairly feature complete. I'm not missing any big features. So maybe, I don't know if it's gone into sustained engineering or if it's it's actively being developed. It's certainly being supported, no question, and will be for a while. I don't know. Do you have anything to add to that, Philip?
Yeah, it's in active development, so it's not in sustained mode like DA.
Okay.
And I don't see this changing anytime soon. There are features being added. The challenge is maybe not over the next period, because the current semester focus is very much focused on security in general. So I guess less features. I do have a feature wish list, and I guess some of you may have as well. So yeah. And from my perspective is, if you're looking for something more on-prem focused, go for Always On VPN. Or the Windows VPN platform. And if you're much more, or if it's possible to use something more like in a cloud Azure-based focus, go for the SSE or GSA one, right? So that's, but yeah, I think it is
a nice thing about inter-private access, is that it's so easy to install and configure, and I've been involved in the inter-private access, the global secure access, which is, for clarification, everybody else on the call, global secure access is this zero trust network platform that Microsoft has, and there's two primary pillars. There's private access and internet access. The internet access component of global secure access is Cloud Secure Web Gateway. So that's URL filtering, content inspection, malware inspection, those types of things you would do with a secure web gateway. Think of it like a Zscaler, Netscope kind of solution. Okay. Enter private access is for secure remote access. So you install this connector on premises. If you've ever worked at all with the old Azure application proxy, where you install a connector and then you can publish a website through it, that is exactly how the Entra private access works. In fact, it's the same connector. It was just updated to support TCP and UDP, right? So fundamentally, it's the same kind of connector. The nice thing is the connector is outbound access only. You don't have to use load balancers. You don't have to create, ACLs and NAT rules on your firewalls and allow public traffic in. So your solution just talks to the internet, and the Global Secure Access Service routes the traffic from the Global Secure Access client accordingly. So if I make a request for an on-premises resource, the client on the endpoint captures that, sends it to the cloud routes it back to my connector, and boom. And I have published all sorts of things using Global Secure Access, and it's just really, really slick. It's fantastic. So I hope, does that answer your questions at all?
Yeah, that was helpful. Thank you. And if somebody else has questions, feel free to raise your hand or speak up. But yeah, I'd love to pick your brain here. Last I looked at Always On VPN was 5 years ago, so 2020, and I'm just kind of recently brushing up on it because we are looking for either a primary or a backup VPN solution, but some type of secondary VPN solution to access on-prem resources. And so in my notes from 5 years ago, I think at that time, device tunnels didn't support fallback to SSTP. Is that still the case?
That is correct, yes. So that's a fundamental limitation of the VPN client. It's one that Microsoft could theoretically address, I believe, but I don't expect they will. The device tunnel operates over IPv2, and there's no real issues with that. I mean, there's challenges with, of course, firewall navigation, right? So if you're behind a restrictive firewall, then certainly IPv2 is not going to work if nobody's allowed those ports out, and so that can be problematic. The good news is that the device tunnel is not. The device tunnel is only critical when you absolutely need it. Put it that way, right? So.
First time login type stuff.
First time, like if you're trying to log on without cache credentials, or there's been a password change, then you really need that. More often than not, most users won't even notice that the device tunnel isn't working. And perfect case in point was that about 6 months ago, I was working with a customer who reached out and said, "Hey, we've just noticed that none of our device tunnels are connecting. Can you help us troubleshoot?" And so I got on and looked at it and started going through logs and just looking at a test client and going, wow, okay, this is indicative of an expired certificate. So we jumped on the server, and it had expired 3 months previous. So their certificate had been expired for 3 months before they even called me, noticing that they had a problem. So what I find is that if you need it, you absolutely need it, right? But more often than not, you can get away without it. It's just there for those. It's like an insurance policy. It's there, if you absolutely have to have it, you can't do without it. But sometimes it's not as critical as you might think. So I don't find that Ike V2 on the device tunnel is a showstopper for most of my customers. What we have found is that in those use cases, in those corner cases where I have a user, I'm trying to log them onto a brand new laptop, so they have no user profile, no cache credentials, and they can't connect. Have them tethered to their phone, have them move to a different location, and you can usually solve those problems. But what we've found is that the vast majority of like home networks where people are going to be connecting are usually wide open anyway, right? There's no outbound restrictions, and so Ike V2 usually just works. So I wouldn't worry about that too much, honestly. It hasn't been, in my experience, it hasn't been a huge problem. So I'll put it that way.
And forgive, I'm just, dusting this off, and let me know if you've already answered these questions. But so with the two tunnels, the device and the user tunnel, is each endpoint getting two IPv4 addresses?
Correct. They are two
Interesting.
distinct connections, two totally separate connections, and they literally don't know about each other. So yeah, so you have the device tunnel will connect when the machine starts and has access to the internet, and so it's established connection to the network when the user is looking at their logon screen. And the idea there is if it's a domain joined device, then if I type in a password that my local cache doesn't have or doesn't recognize, it can talk to a domain controller over that device connection, process that logon, cache it locally, and then give me the logon credential, give me my Kerberos ticket, and then send me to my desktop. So in that scenario, that's when it's really important for a device tunnel. But they are two separate connections. Now, I typically, when I deploy Always On VPN, will tailor the routing tables such that when the device tunnel is connected, or when the user tunnel is connected, that all traffic flows over the user tunnel and nothing flows over the device tunnel, because it makes it a little cleaner. It avoids some asymmetric routing challenges that come up. Also eliminates some of the conflicts that you might have with IKE v2 if a tunnel is up, but it's not passing traffic, which happens occasionally. So there's a variety of tools and techniques that you can use to ensure that happens. And if you need some more details on that, just reach out to me separately, and I can provide you with some examples of how you do that.
And so it's the user tunnel that registers with DNS?
Depends. So we will typically register the device tunnel in DNS because the device tunnel is connected without the user logging on. So that's helpful if you're logging on. You don't want the user to have to log on to their laptop. Also, if you're working on it remotely and you want to reboot, you don't have to have the user there log back in. You can just tell the user to get lost, and then you can just work on it. So, so in that regards, we typically use the device tunnel.
Interesting. And so access-wise, both tunnels have access to the same remote resources?
Generally speaking, we configure the device tunnel to have limited access to the network. So in other words, think of the device tunnel as almost like a helper tunnel or a supplemental tunnel. It's there for a very, very specific purpose, which is to provide access to the domain to process a logon. And so with that, we typically only grant access on the device tunnel to things like domain controllers. Now, There are some other things you may want to do. A lot of times we will include things like
PKI,
patch management. Patch management servers. Patch management servers, things like, what am I thinking of? Systems management servers, malware update, security update servers, and things like that. There's things that we can put in there, but we typically don't put the whole network in there because we don't need that. Once the user tunnel is established, we're going to flow all the traffic over the user tunnel, and the user tunnel is more robustly authenticated, so we prefer the traffic to go over that tunnel.
Okay. And bouncing around here, and I haven't looked it up recently, but does Always On VPN support autopilot?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it's basically you're deploying the Always On VPN profiles using Intune, and you just target the autopilot group. So for example, if you're doing autopilot with hybrid join, then you would just make sure that you issue a certificate using Intune and also deploy the device tunnel using Intune. That way, during the autopilot phase, once it's done and you get to the first logon prompt, you've already deployed the certificate in the device tunnel, and the user can enter their credentials there, access the domain, and then log on, finish their logon.
Okay. And if I need, let's say I've got an on-prem data center and I need to have 2 or 3 Always On VPN servers with direct access, it kind of bundles it with NLB for load balancing intrasite. Yeah. What is recommended for load balancing with Always On VPN?
So with Always On VPN, if you're using Windows Server Routing and Remote Access, or RRAS, those are kind of standalone, right? They're rather siloed. They don't really know or care about each other. There's no concept of multi-site with Always On VPN like there is in direct access. However, it's very easy to load balance because you just stand up multiple servers and put them behind a load balancer. We avoid the use of NLB historically just because it had so many problems. NLB is a tough load balancer to work in a lot of environments, especially virtual environments, because there were some known issues there, especially in VMware. But NLB has been deprecated, so we want to really avoid using NLB going forward. There are many fantastic load balancing solutions out there. One of my favorites is loadbalancer.org. I had the opportunity to work with them late last year, early this year, and was pleasantly surprised at how easy it was to install and configure. So if you're looking for an on-premises load balancer and you want to do layer 3, layer 4 load balancing, then that's a fantastic solution. I have many customers, though, I'll be honest with you, that are moving towards just DNS load balancing. So in other words, you have multiple VPN servers that are all mapped to public IP addresses, and then you just use DNS to do the traffic distribution. Azure Traffic Manager is a fantastic solution for that. You can set up, there's a variety of different routing methods you can use to do load balancing. So you can use geographic, you can use performance, you can do active passive. So in other words, all traffic goes to point A unless it's not available, then it goes to point B. A lot of different ways that you can do that.
So no visibility into the traffic load, but at least it's some kind of divvying of
exactly, yeah.
Traffic per site.
At the end of the day, you have to decide, what your requirements are. If you prefer to more granularly tailor, traffic and have view into, the throughput and performance, a layer 3, layer 4 load balancer on premises is better. If you're just looking for redundancy and high availability, then maybe a DNS-based solution is easier. Obviously, DNS-based solutions are much less expensive. So even though the loadbalancer.org solution is very cost effective, it's not very expensive at all. It is, it's much more expensive certainly than Azure Traffic Manager. I think the last time I looked at Azure Traffic Manager, what was it? It was like 50 cents per billion DNS queries or something like that. It's ridiculous. It's like one of the most cost-effective cloud services that Azure has. It's pretty phenomenal. So really cost-effective way to handle load balancing and geographic redundancy.
And for DNS like that, is it just doing a simple ping check to each of the
It depends.
Always on VPN server, or
it depends. If you're using SSTP, then you can do an HTTP check and actually look at the service. So I've had some published guidance on my website for how to do that. If you look up Always On VPN Azure Traffic Manager, you will find a guide for how to set up the health monitors and all that stuff for that.
Perfect. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Good deal.
Okay, so that handles intrasite and I guess failover type load balancing. Okay.
Good deal. Yep.
And if we had to have if we have a requirement for MFA for a remote access,
yes.
What does that look like with Always On VPN?
If you're gonna, well, first of all, let me back up for a second. If MFA as a requirement, my suggestion is to use hardware-backed user authentication certificates, because those do satisfy multi-factor authentication requirements. So basically, the certificate is embedded in the hardware, specifically, TPM. And once the certificate is embedded in device hardware, the device itself functionally becomes a smart card. So, you have to have physical control over the device. The certificate can't be stolen, so that becomes an MFA. I have implemented this solution for many customers to meet cyber security insurance requirements, and it meets that solution meets the auditor's requirements for MFA. If you want to do a kind of more classic out of band MFA, meaning if that device is stolen or lost and an attacker has access to the physical device, then they have access to that certificate. They can't steal it, but they have the certificate. They have the certificate by virtue of the fact that they have the laptop or tablet. So if you're looking for a more traditional out of band MFA, my suggestion would be to integrate with interconditional access and then use conditional access policies to enforce MFA. That way you can do MFA. You don't have to do it every single time, because the challenge with MFA, out of band MFA, is it breaks that seamless, transparent nature of Always On VPN. Always On VPN is beautiful. It's a thing of beauty because it just works. Nobody has to do anything. You just open up your laptop, log in. You have access to things. You're not bothered. You're not. It's great. It works really, really well. But if you're looking for that, if you do interconditional access integration, you can do things like create policies to say, hey, only MFA based on sign-in risk. So hey, if it's low sign-in risk and you're using phishing-resistant credentials, then I'm not going to bother you. But if this is a risky sign-in, then I'm going to MFA you out of bound. And so that's kind of a balance that works out to provide a real good balance between security and functionality.
Interesting. Have you come across anybody trying to do that adaptive MFA with Okta with Always On VPN?
No, I have not.
Okay.
I'm sure it's possible. Then, I just don't know. I don't have any experience there.
Yeah, and then with the certs, so is it a computer certificate for the device tunnel and then user certificate for the user tunnel?
Correct, yes.
So 2 different certs, and those are either via Intune or, well, probably Intune for.
Yeah, depends on how it really depends on how you're provisioning your endpoints. If you're doing it, the classic way, on premises, domain joined, and you're provisioning them, in a building somewhere, an office, then you can get away with issuing those certificates locally. But if you're doing this, cloud-based, using Intune, doing native interjoin, then you're going to need to issue them with Intune. Looking at some of these, just catching up on some of the comments here. Let's see here. Some of these are just kind of supporting what you were saying. Ed is basically saying, we just implemented Always On VPN, still on premises, the right move for us. Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, Ed, there, 100%. And then Seth, ideally, you want the device tunnel to talk only your DCs. Absolutely right. And there's a couple of different ways to do that. You can limit that by routes. You can use traffic filters. But there are good ways to do that. Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of an industry best practice. And then, Ed, you said you make your device tunnel a little more permissive to include file shares and print servers. Yeah, that happens from time to time where it helps. Opening up the access over the device tunnel to things like that can help with group policy processing. So if you're mapping drives and things of that nature, then you're right. You do need to provide a little bit more access. Typically, what I do, Ed, and the joys of group policy, no question. Typically, what I do, Ed, is when I'm deploying this, is I'll start with the basics. I'll say, hey, I want just the domain controllers, and then we will test. And if we get 5-minute logons, we go, okay, we'll enable verbose logging, and let's see where it's complaining. And it's like, oh yeah, it's mapping a drive and it needs access to this DFS share. Okay, we'll add that to the device tunnel and go from there. So, no question. And then of course, this is the joys of intra-joined only, because then we don't have to worry about that. In fact, the device tunnel is not even required on intra-joint. It's not even supported. But yeah, that's it. 10 to 20 minutes logons. Yeah. Yeah. And printing, you're right. Printing is probably the most common, offender there for group policy processing delays. Has been my thing, is that that can be problematic. I've also found that if you have not mapped your VPN client IP prefixes, IPv4 or IPv6, in Active Directory sites and subnets, you can have poor logon performance as well. So when you're logging on, it's trying to use DC locator, right? And it's looking at the source address of the request, which is the VPN client. If it's not in 80 sites and services, and this is often commonly overlooked by administrators, Always On VPN administrators, is that what'll happen is it'll just guess. And the worst part about it is that, and this has just been my personal experience, if if the subnet is not mapped in 80 sites and services, 80 will just magically pick the worst domain controller it can. I don't know. It's just been my luck when troubleshooting this. I have done this a number of times. As a matter of fact, it was really problematic with direct access. Is that I had a customer I was doing some troubleshooting with once, and I've told this story a bunch of times, where we were having long delays, and so we started doing some tracing, and sure enough, in this case, the direct access client IPv6 prefix was not mapped properly in 80 sites and services, and so what it was doing is just choosing a random domain controller, and so what it found was that we were logging on in New York. In the New York data center, there was 5 domain controllers, and this was a multinational company. And this was picking a domain controller in Singapore, where there was a data center that had some really poor quality link. And anyway, bottom line was it picked like seemingly the worst domain controller it could possibly pick, right? But it never fails to work that way. So 80 sites and services, yeah. And if you want to double check that, I would encourage you to do that. So just if you're assigning, typically we're assigning client VPN client IP prefixes, IPv4 or IPv6. We're usually statically assigning those. We're typically using static pool. And if you're using IPv4 and IPv6, that's the only option. Just make sure that those are mapped in 80 sites and services and that you've assigned appropriate domain controllers. Typically, it's the domain controllers from the site where the VPN servers are. That's usually the easiest way I've found. But that will ensure the DC locator process is working and functioning optimally. Excuse me. Let's see here. Oh, and you said also you have RAS behind loadbalancer.org, Eric. Oh no, you said that to Eric. Sorry, this is Ed. Yeah, that's a great solution. I just had the opportunity to work with loadbalancer.org late last year, early this year, and they'd been around a long time. I was aware of them, I'd heard of them, but I'd never worked with them. And when I had the chance to work with it, I was like really, really happy. So I did. I actually have published guidance for that. I tightened that up this year because I'm typically working with the big 3 like F5, Citrix, NetScaler, or ADC, and then Kemp. And so I have published guides for all of those. And in fact, the Kemp load balancing solution, I actually created the guide that's online at Kemp. So they actually had contracted me to do that. But I never worked with loadbalancer.org. So once I had the chance to work with that, I put together some documentation. So that kind of completes that out. So if you look on my website, if you just search loadbalancer.org on my website, you'll find a guide to how to set that up. So cool. Moving on. Let's see. Device and user tunnel again. Access can only be managed using different routing configs, right? There's no ACL possibilities. Both clients are in the same subnet, use the same gateway. No chance to assign different IP networks. So correct. So the way this works is that if you have device tunnel and user tunnel, and they're connecting to the same gateway, they're going to get an address from the same address pool. So it will be on the same subnet. There is no way to sign, and Martin, this goes to your question because I think you asked it a minute ago. Let me back up just a second. I thought I saw that in here. Yeah, on AOVPN devices can't be assigned a static IP. So it's difficult to assign a static IP to an Always On VPN device. Let's put it that way, Martin. But getting back to this device tunnel, I'll get back to you in a second on that, Martin. But let me finish up this thought here on the device and user tunnel. So in this scenario, when the device and user tunnel connect to the VPN doesn't really know or care that they're a user or a device connection. They're just going to give them the next IP address from the pool. So naturally, they're going to get the same subnet. If you need to have a back firewall, and this is really common, and I do this all the time, you implement a back firewall to do some additional security filtering, right? So now it's basically client, VPN gateway, and then there's a firewall before it gets to the LAN. And there's where you would put your ACLs. And what you're looking to do is basically distinguish between user tunnels and device tunnels. In that case, you should use separate servers. So we do, and I do this very commonly because this is a common ask. where we will stand up a server that supports device connections, and we have another server that supports user connections. And that way the device profile has a different FQDN, and it connects to a different server, and it will get a different prefix. And that prefix is very easy to ACL. So the back firewall there just says, hey, anybody connected with this IPv4 prefix, right, is got to be a device tunnel, because they would have connected to this server, and this would be their source IP address. It would be from this range. And so in that way, that's how we accomplish that sort of filtering, back firewall filtering, is by segregating our user tunnel and device tunnel connections. So we just set up different servers for them. So hopefully that helps you.
Do you have any sense of what the traffic split is between device and let's say we wired that up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is it 5% of traffic would go to the device tunnel and most
it
of
entirely,
it user,
I mean, it's so hard that would be really difficult to put a number on. And because it depends on your configuration, it depends on how much traffic is going to domain controllers. It would also depend on if you've co-located any other services on domain controllers. So if you have a smaller environment and your domain controllers are also file shares, then obviously there's a lot more traffic going to domain controllers than might otherwise. So there's a variety of things that play into that. The way I typically do it, though, is I typically ensure that when the user tunnel is up, all traffic flows over the user tunnel, so I don't really worry about it that much. Let's see. Can I just confirm, this is David, can I just confirm if anyone is using Always On VPN with 24H2, anyone see any performance issues or packet loss at all? Good question. David, I've been doing a lot of testing on 24H2. I've not noticed any issues at all. That's not to say that there aren't any. Anytime we're talking about performance issues, there are driver considerations to be made, firmware considerations to be made. I am not aware of anything systemic to Windows 11 24H2. Maybe I'll throw this question over to you, Philip. Are you aware of any challenges, limitations with the 24H2 as far as Windows 11?
Not specifically 24H2. There might be some general performance challenges, but that would affect any even Windows 10. So
I see.
Not specifically to 24H2.
Yeah, I'm not having.
David, are you seeing a specific scenario there where you see packet loss or drops? Or
yeah, hi guys. Thanks for picking up my question.
Yeah.
It's a bit of an open investigation at the moment, and what we're doing is we're actually rolling out new hardware at the same time. So it's trying to pull those two things apart. And we essentially did a pilot, and we used a certain hardware. We've gone live, and Dell fortunately sort of decommed the model that we were piloting with, and we've rolled out with a slightly different model. And we've gone with these Latitude 7350s, and I'm trying to basically pull it apart as to whether it's a 24H2 issue, or if it's perhaps a network driver issue with the laptops. But essentially, we've got one application which it's not a very nice application. It does direct SQL calls, and it's a very, very old legacy application, and it has absolutely no inbuilt management for sort of any sort of type of packet loss. Essentially, if you get a single drop packet, the whole program will crash, and you have to sort of X out of it, kill it, and start again. So wow. This application is very good for network testing, actually, because you know if you
know the problem right away.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of infuriating when it's your main finance application, but yeah, we're
was betting it's a finance application. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's always finance application, isn't it? That seems to be the bane of our existence. You know, I'd say. But unfortunately, it's not going anywhere anytime soon. So even though it is legacy, but yeah, I just wanted to see what the camp thought really, because it would make my life a lot easier if some other people put their hands up and said, oh yeah, actually, because we did Windows 11 23H2 for a very long time, and no problems at all. And the only things that have changed in this rollout are, like I say, 24H2, and then obviously the new hardware. So it could absolutely be the new hardware.
Yeah.
I was kind of hoping for a little cheat code here, and whether people say yes or no, really.
And I think Philip and I had this conversation recently, is that anytime there's, throughput issues, packet loss issues, I mean, the first culprits are always going to be drivers and firmware, right? And as we've discussed in the past, sometimes it's not even updating; it's actually rolling back. that sometimes an updated driver can cause a problem, and if you roll back, then you solve your problems, right? So it's always possible that challenges or issues get introduced with new versions, but especially if you're talking new hardware too, that's always another wild card that kind of is challenging to deal with for sure.
Yeah, okay. I can see from the chat there's a few people that have chimed in actually saying 24H2. Thank you, Martin, saying it's very stable. In fact, use it yourself, and you've probably done a lot of testing on the latest, seeing the latest OSs to keep yourself up to date. So
quite a bit,
perhaps it is perhaps it is one over to a hardware issue.
Yeah.
Thank you though.
Yeah, for
well,
sure.
it could be OS2 to be fair, because between 23H2 and 24H2 there's multiple kernel versions in between. So if you have raised a support case, let me know the case number or feel free to reach out.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Philip.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, good deal. I want to get back to Martin's question, though, because I kind of glossed over that a little bit. But Martin, you had asked, let me scroll back up to the top here. It was pretty early on. On Always On VPN devices cannot be assigned static IP addresses. So the challenge with that is, technically speaking, yes, there's a couple of different ways to do it. None of them are very good. You could do it with Active Directory. You can actually assign a static IP address to a user or a device using AD, and there's actually there's a setting in there where you can assign that. The problem with that is that if you have more than one VPN server, you can only assign one static IP address, and so you can't have the same static address pool across each of the servers, because then that would be a conflict. And so that's a real problem. If you had one server, or if you had the ability to know that user or device was always going to connect to that one server, you can definitely assign a static IP address, but not a great idea. So I would avoid that as much as possible.
Can I comment on that? Well,
Yeah.
actually, can I ask this question? Because you remember you gave out a guidance on how to assign IP addresses to users.
Yes.
And that works perfectly.
Okay.
What's the difference with machine? Largely the question.
It's a good question. So I honestly don't know if you can do it at the machine level. I don't know that is because that would be part of its computer account, and I don't believe it's possible to do it at the machine level. I should clarify that.
No.
Yeah,
no, I don't think
you can do it for the user, but you can't do it for the machine. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the good old RAS tab in the user object, and I don't believe that exists in the computer object.
That's not in the computer object. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, all the challenges, as Richard mentioned, right? You can only have one and only on one server. So yeah, it's possible. I have customers doing that, but it's challenging to support.
No question. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, we don't have a better answer for you than that, Martin.
But what's the
sorry,
if I can ask, what's the reason? Is it firewall rules based on IP address or?
No. We have a lot of machines going out. We have loaner machines for different people. It's more like having an IKE V2.
Okay.
So, and when you log in, it would be easier to control that machine as well. Something like that.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, there's no good way to handle that, at least at the device level, unfortunately. But it is good to know. You said that the user is working for you, though. You're signing those via Active Directory, then?
Yes.
Oh, good. Good to know.
Exactly how you described it. Thank you.
Fantastic. And you just have a single VPN server then?
No, I have two.
No.
Yeah, and it works either way. Okay. As long as it gets connected, it gets an IP address, and it's great.
Good deal. As long as there's no conflicts, I guess it should work then.
Maybe for two, it's fine. Maybe beyond that, you might have an issue already.
Yeah. Well,
the only challenge is in the MPS policy, right? You need to uncheck this box to not ignore the dial-in settings.
To not ignore, that's right.
Because otherwise, it's just doing that. It's ignoring it. And, it's not very fun to find that. Yeah.
And you make up a good point, Philip, because I check that box just as a matter of habit. because I don't want to deal with it, right? I don't want there to be any problems. But in that specific scenario, we do need that capability, so we do have to uncheck or check the box.
And it's easy to overlook. Yeah, it's easy to overlook.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, if you're assigning an IP address from the same subnet that the VPN servers is on, then it actually would work with multiple servers, right? Because the VPN servers use proxy ARP for that. But if you're using unique client subnets, then that wouldn't work. But yeah, so I guess it would really depend on how you're doing client address assignment. But yeah, that would in theory work. You're right, even across multiple servers, at least if they were in the same site.
Yeah, it's in the same site, so it should work.
Yeah.
It's working. Should work. It's actually working.
And it's quite funny if you try to log in with 2 users for the same time from 2 different locations. That's completely messing up your route table.
Oh yeah,
that's the drawback. The thing is, since you assign this IP address to an individual and you keep track of these numbers, you shouldn't assign it a second time. But it's true. With 2 machines, I did it. You can actually log in with the same credentials. If you're lucky to land on different servers, you have the same IP address. That's true.
Right. And that'll be fun, huh? Yeah. Yes, just as long as you know that, hey, you make sure that user can't log in more than on multiple devices at the same time, right? They can do it on multiple devices, but just not at the same time.
Yeah.
So they shouldn't be doing that anyway, right? Good deal. Awesome. Great to hear, Martin. Great to hear from you as well.
Thank you.
Let's see here. Catch up on some of these comments here. That one we got. Talk to David. Ed. Yep. Let's see here. Great stuff. Let's see here. Let's see. Is there a solution to the old issue with TPM and the RSA PSS signature algorithm, apart from removing RSA PSS signature suites from the registry or updating TPM where Lenovo has not updated an older device? Not to my knowledge. That this is an issue for clarification for everybody else on the call, kind of a level set. There was a problem. There is a known issue with certificates stored in TPM when the TPM model is an older TPM model. And there's a workaround, which is basically just remove some of these cipher suites from the TPM, and then it starts working. I am not aware, so I am not certain that there's any way to work around that other than those 2 things: removing those ciphers or updating the TPM. Updating TPM is not trivial, and a lot of manufacturers don't support updating TPMs on older devices, right? So they just want you to buy new ones. I'm curious though, is there is removing RSA PSS signatures causing a problem for you? Is it breaking any of their applications? Do you know?
Hey, Richard, yeah, it creates a lot of issue with other services.
It does,
based on TLS. That's why it's not a viable workaround.
Okay. What version of Windows are you running on that? Is it Windows 11?
It's Windows 11. On Windows 10, that works.
Okay, so here, so I did have, 11. So get this, and maybe you can try this out and let me know what you see. I did have a customer report an issue similar to this, and what they ended up having to do as a workaround was disabling TLS 1.3. I would be curious to know, because that would explain why it still works on Windows 10, right? You may want to disable TLS 1.3 on that client and see if that solves your problem. It's not an ideal solution, but maybe one in which it helps you for a period of time until you can get to newer hardware.
Okay, thank you for that tip. We'll check it.
Yeah, let me know. Drop me a note and let me know if that helps you.
Be careful with that. I've seen issues, especially on newer 11 versions, where it's breaking some basic things, right? Because the OS expects PSS to be there, and then it's not.
Exactly.
On 10 it was easier because I believe in Windows 10 22 H2, I think we made the shift from something to PSS.
I see.
So yeah, in 11 it might be a bit more challenging there, right? And as you said, because it's the TPM sub version, not really the TPM version, in many cases, even a TPM update wouldn't help because it's just in many cases you can't update the TPM sub version. You just need a new TPM chip, and which usually means another device or a new device.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no question. And by the way, Philip, I've run into this with a couple of customers already where um, we encountered some scenarios where disabling RSAPSS it was breaking other things. And so what we ended up doing for one of the customers is we ended up going with non-TPM certificates and just using a really short certificate lifetime. So we basically, and it was a pretty big customer, and they only had like a subset, maybe less than 100 devices, maybe not even that had the older TPMs, and they're scheduled for refresh, right? So it's not a permanent solution. But ultimately, what we did is we just basically said, hey, for users on these devices, we're going to issue a non-TPM certificate. The certificate's only valid for 30 days. They were using on-premises Active Directory group policy, so it's really easy to, they'll just renew on their own. And so that's kind of the way we address that. So instead of, and basically just address it as a subset of those users. So make sure that if they're on those old devices, then they get a non-TPM certificate.
Yeah, I did the same with another customer, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that sounds like a viable workaround for this issue.
Yep. And you don't do it for everybody because you don't, you really want TPM as much as possible because it's a really good thing. But in those cases where you can't support it, issue a non-TPM certificate. Just make sure it has a really short lifetime. The risk there is that these certificates, if they're stolen, can be used to authenticate as those users, right? And especially if that certificate is granting them access to the VPN, that's a really dangerous thing. So we want to make sure that those certificates don't have an exceedingly long lifetime if they're not protected by TPM.
All the devices really protected, like BitLocker, startup pin, something like that. Yeah.
Yep.
But it is quite interesting because it worked on Windows 10 with the older TPM, and doesn't work on Windows 11 with the TPM, which is the same TPM, only Windows changed. So it seems like a regression.
In Windows 10 22H2, we switched the default encryption mechanism to PSS.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
so I believe it was. I believe it was. It was either 21H2 or 22H2, and so before it wouldn't be a problem because it's not being used, but afterwards it is. So are these older devices, Lucas, or because normally...
So these are still like a good notebooks from Lenovo, which are like 5 years old. They are not very old. Yeah.
Okay. That should.
And Windows 11 works great on them. And the only one issue is this Always On VPN connection that doesn't connect. And when we remove those registry entries, we have issues with other TLS connections to other services.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I guess Rich's recommendation is what I would do too. Exclude them and put them into a group and say on these devices they don't get a TPM protected certificate, but rather short-lived one. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. I appreciate your insights. Thank you.
You bet. Good deal. Awesome. So, any other questions at all? It looks like the chat has died down. And we're approaching. Good.
Yeah, I was curious what you typically see for the back end systems. I guess I was assuming RAS, but it sounds like people use different back end systems. What do you see most commonly?
Yeah, so the good news, the good thing about Always On VPN is that it is infrastructure independent. So it supports pretty much anything as long as it supports the VPN protocols and authentication schemes, then it doesn't really know or care what the backend server is. We deploy RAS commonly, most commonly for a couple of reasons. One, it is cost effective, right? It doesn't cost anything. We can spin up a VM anytime we want. It scales very effectively. If I need more resources, I can just add more VMs and put it behind a load balancer or do DNS for load balancing. It supports the full feature set of Always On VPN, so device tunnel, user tunnel with TLS, SSTP. It's easy to install and configure. Again, no proprietary skill sets required to manage it. It's just a Windows server. So that's what makes it really attractive from an operational perspective. But you also can deploy Always On VPN with Cisco, Checkpoint, SonicWall, Fortinet, Juniper, almost every platform will support Always On VPN in some form or another. Whether or not they have support for the full feature set, I don't know. Some of them are very limited. So, for example, I think, and it's been a long time since I worked with them, but I remember Sophos didn't work because they didn't support IKV2 for client-based VPN, only site-to-site VPN, which I thought was really bizarre. I don't know if that's still the case today. Yeah. So there's some weird things that come up with that. Again, if you want to use the native client, the native VPN client in Windows, then the platform has to support IKV2, and IKV2 has its challenges, known limitations, and things like that. Many of the security vendors support what's known as a plugin for VPN. Excuse me, not Always On VPN, but a plugin for the VPN. So, for example, I could download the plugin for Palo Alto Global Protect, and it basically integrates with the native Windows client, but it adds some Palo Alto features. And so that works with Always On VPN as well. So you either have to use the native client or you have to use the plugin provider. The advantage of the plugin providers is that they do oftentimes support TLS, but sometimes they're not well supported by the vendors as well. So the last time I looked at one of them, it was like many, many years old. So I don't know how much development work they were doing on it. So you take that as it comes. So one of the reasons we deploy RAS, or routing and remote access, is again, it is very easy to consume, no additional licensing. You don't have to license additional resources. Like if you want to scale out or scale up, you don't have to buy new things or license new things. You just add services. So that's why RAS is pretty common.
Okay, interesting. And have you, I think I had crossed Always On VPN off my list because there was that typical attack surface. And so as we're trying to reduce our attack surface, I just wasn't.
Oh, you did ask that question. I just thought about that. I thought, somebody asked me about that a little while ago. I just scrolled up. Sorry about that. Sorry, I missed that. So attack surface is always a challenge, right? So first of all, it is a Windows server. So we have to be cognizant of that. From a security perspective, we would never put the RS server directly on the internet, right? So it's always going to have a private IPv4 address. It's always going to be behind an edge firewall. So the edge firewall is going to have the public IP address. We'll have an ACL rule and NAT rule that delivers the traffic to the VPN server. And in that regard, our attack surface is greatly reduced because now we're only exposed to the internet on specific protocols and ports. Now, within that perimeter or DMZ network where the RAS server is housed is a potential risk. I always recommend deploying RAS servers in a dedicated and isolated DMZ or perimeter network, or DMZ for my British friends. Leo's not here to laugh. Anyway, the attack surface of the server in the perimeter network is a potential risk, especially if it's a shared DMZ. So, for example, if it's a shared DMZ and an attacker compromises another web server in that network, then they can perform a lateral attack to get to the RAS server. In that scenario, I recommend that the RAS server not be domain joined. If you're in a perimeter or DMZ network, it's not a good idea to join a domain. Or if you're doing a domain join, it should be a perimeter DMZ network isolated domain. I've done that before for customers where they have a separate domain for that, which helps with management and things like that. But typically that would not be domain joined. And then of course, there's some, your typical attack surface reduction and hardening processes would be followed, disabling services that aren't needed, ensuring that the firewall is properly configured. I always in those environments do a quick port scan just to look at, just to make sure that there's not any services that are exposed needlessly. Often you'll find, WMI and COM and WinRM or things like that are exposed that you'll want to address. But those are easy enough to fix. I've deployed RAS servers for some environments that were highly security conscious and had no problems passing security audits, no issues at all. So it's been a good platform, and it can be very secure. And then also would wholeheartedly encourage you to use Windows Server Core, because that is a obviously a much better solution to do from a security perspective, because much of the attack surface reduction has already been done by the fact that it's a refactored version of Windows without all of the graphical user interface components and media players and browsers and things like that are built into the solution that are rich attack surfaces for attackers.
Yeah, it would add cost, but there's, we use a couple of solutions from Zero Networks is the company, and one of them is they, have orchestrator on-prem that essentially, instead of GPOs controlling your firewalls, your Windows firewalls, they handle that. And so for internet, they have a newish product that I think it's called external MFA or something, but they any Windows host or Linux, but on a Windows host, they close all the firewall ports. And so it would kind of break the device tunnel. But if you authenticate on their portal, click a get access button, they add a just-in-time rule granting your IP access to the destination server for like 1 day. And so I'm kind of chewing but again, it's like the E5 RS, that's free. But if we have to layer on something on top of that, that's like I'm trying to weigh all those pros and cons of okay, you get I was trying to steer away from the attack surface, but cost is kind of pushing us back.
Yeah, no question. But like I said, you if you were to stand up a non-domain joined Windows server on server core, and then just ensure that your Windows firewall rules are tight, I think you have a very very secure solution. I don't think there's going to be any problems with that.
Yeah, hopefully not. It's just, we haven't had any issues that I know about with direct access, but I just, whether it's Pulse Secure, everyone thinks their code is secure until they get owned. And then.
Yeah. By the way, I've had customers argue that, I've got Fortinet solution and it's, way more secure. It's like, you guys have these horrible vulnerabilities seemingly every month. I don't know that I would trust one as far as I could throw it. But anyway, be that as it may.
Well, thanks a ton for your thoughts and comments here. This is greatly helpful. Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, man. Great questions. And by the way, you know where to find me. I'm on the internet. And by the way, and this goes for everybody on the call, I'm always just an email away. If you ever have questions outside of this and you want to ask a question, just drop me an email. Again, hit that forum. I mean, we got tons of people on there, not just me. That participate there, and there's a lot of experience and knowledge there. So if you want, you can ask questions there as well. But again, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly if you want to share information or whatever. That's fine. But other than that, I think we're going to call it a day. And we're up at the top of the hour here. We've been going for almost 2 hours, so I think we'll wrap it up here. But I do appreciate everybody joining us. I think we've got everything. I'm just double check all these questions. I think we've got everything else. If there's something else, just yell. Otherwise, I think maybe we'll wrap. What are your thoughts? Anybody else? Last call, as it were.
I had one out there. I can just shoot you an email, though.
Okay, cool. Yeah, do it. Be happy to answer those questions there. And then for anybody else, you know where to find me mostly. I mean, most of you got on this call because you were following me somewhere. But if you'd like to connect with me on social media or anything else, richardhicks.com/connect. And I'm on almost all of the platforms. I'm still on X. I'm not going to go on Blue Sky or one of those other ones just because it's too much. I have enough to do with all of these platforms. So anyway, hopefully everybody else is still on X. X is my platform of choice, but you can find me on all of those as well. So don't hesitate to reach out. But until next time, and again, last year I was kind of remiss. I only had a couple of these, and they were pretty far apart. I'm going to try to endeavor to do them a little more often this year, maybe once a quarter-ish. First one was in January. This is in May. So maybe we'll meet, in July, August or sometime, and then maybe once more before the end of the year. But I do appreciate everybody joining. And thanks again. We'll all talk soon. And thanks, Leo. And thanks, Philip, for participating. I appreciate your help as always.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.